All right, it looks like everyone has made it in to the call, so we will go ahead and get started. It's about 10:02. So thank you all for joining us. My name is Rebecca Roberson. I'm a senior elections communications specialist here at the Elections Group. And I just wanted to thank all of our attendees for joining us today. This is our first Communications Resource Desk workshop. And today we are going to be covering all things logo and branding. I'm really excited to have two industry leaders with us here today. They're going to help facilitate our workshop and guide our discussion. So we're going to go ahead and take a moment for introductions. First of all, we have Drew Davies. He is the founder of Oxide Design. I will go ahead and kick things over to Drew for his introduction.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. It's great to have a lively group of people here, and I'm always happy to spread the word. I really appreciate the Elections Group for having me here this morning. By way of introduction, I am a brand and design consultant. I run a firm called Oxide, and I sit at a very strange, unusual intersection of branding and election design. My firm is a traditional branding firm, so we do a lot of logo and branding and brand identity work. But at the same time, for the last 15 years, I've been thoroughly involved in a wide variety of elections and civic design work, everywhere from designing the best practices for optical scan ballot design for the EAC some 15 years ago, and doing voter information materials, ballots, voter registration forms, voting websites, and the like for everywhere from California to New York and a zillion counties in between along the way. So thanks again for having me.
Thank you, Drew. And our other guest on today's call, I'm still getting used to his new title, so bear with me as I get this out. But we have Alton Dillard. He is now the principal consultant at the Dillard Group, and he is the former PIO for the Denver office of the Clerk and Recorder. So we're really excited to have Alton here, and I will kick it to him for his introduction as well.
Well, hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Again, I'm Alton Dillard. I just recently retired after 17 years in communications at the Denver office of the Clerk and Recorder. And prior to that, I spent 12 years as a press secretary to a former United States senator. So to be crystal clear, Drew is the branding expert, but I'll be providing some color commentary as somebody who was with an elections entity during an initial branding and then also some transitions of that brand over the years. Looking forward to talking to everybody.
Great. Thank you both. And thank you both for being here. Thank you to everyone at home who's joining us. Before I kick things over to Drew for the workshop, I do just want to mention for all of the attendees in the webinar that the Q&A feature should be on. So you all are able to ask questions as we go through our workshop today. We are going to have a dedicated Q&A section of our presentation. If there's not a good time for us to answer the question in the middle of the presentation, we will have that dedicated space. So we're not ignoring your question, we do see it. And with that, we will go ahead and kick things over to Drew to get us started on our workshop.
All right, Danny, I'll have you kick us about 2 slides forward here. Big thanks in advance to Danny, who's operating as our Vanna White today, helping us move through some slides. So one more from there, Danny. I have been accused of being a little bit OCD, so I'm going to give you all my what to expect list here because it makes me feel better and hopefully gives you a little bit of the roadmap of where we're up to. Before I do that, I do want to note, Alton talks about me as the expert, but quite frankly, the work I do is the easy stuff. The work that everyone boots on the ground is doing in terms of actually the work in the elections offices is the hard stuff. So I both appreciate Alton being here and his service doing that, but the rest of you who are actually in the trenches doing the hard work. So we're going to go through 3 or 4 key sections today. One is I just want to take you through basic level setting of what branding is. We're all using some of the same terminology. We're moving forward from there. After that, we're going to move on to some discussion about why branding is valuable and talk about, really what we're all here for in terms of why it is we're doing branding at all. After that, Alton's gonna walk through some of his real world experience on implementing new and consistent branding in the elections office. And then definitely as a workshop, we want to give you some real take home tidbits on how you can get started in this process once you learn about how exciting and fun it is from Alton and myself. With that, I'll move quickly into our section about some definitions. I just want to make sure, at least for this call, we're all taking the same definitions of these words as we go. So Danny, I'll take the next slide here. Big picture, the word brand and branding are used so broadly anymore that I have to do this even with every new client we start out with in terms of discussion about what we even mean by branding. Lots of people decide they're going to do some branding and no one quite knows exactly what that word means. While Danny's getting slides squared away, I will tell you that there's the intellectuals in the branding world talk about brand, the word brand being a definition of the thing we can't quite control. It's actually the collective perception that everyone out in the world has of our entity. So it's what all the people, voters and non-voters alike in your community, think and feel and perceive about who you are. So that's a part we can start to control around the edges, but it isn't a thing we can just choose what it is. The people choose what it is based on a variety of information we give them and what their interactions with us and whatnot are like. Danny, I'll go a couple more slides if you're ready. Then past brand, the next term, we'll use this one for today. This is branding has come to be known in a relatively informal way as the things we can control, the collection of the things we put out into the world that people see as our public face, all the touch points we put into the world. So our logo for sure, but any kind of pamphlets, promotional materials, your website, signage in your office, all of those pieces are what make up what we'll call branding for today. So, and I think that's a pretty general usage of that term you'll hear out in the world now today when people talk about we're working on our branding, they talk about these kinds of things, or even when people talk about we're doing a rebranding, typically they're talking about these public facing pieces. And then more specifically for today, this idea about logo. So logo is essentially a subset of that branding, right? It's one thing. Technical definition is the symbol and or stylized text that signify your brand. That logo is the stand-in for you. So it's the thing that people start to recognize as you. So they always see that logo. They know that it's your office that's communicating with them, and they go from there. So oftentimes you'll hear technical wonks like myself refer to that as the brand identity as a subset of branding. So then here's sort of the key idea that I want to ground in the discussion here in terms of why we even talk about logo and branding, right? So why bother is what I wanted to title this section, but Rebecca wouldn't let me put that on the slide. Why build your brand? In reality, there's a huge amount of value to consistent branding. So I like to say here, it's important, relevant, and valuable. One of the key points is that consistent branding ensures that your brand is easily recognizable. This is the point I was just making before. It ensures that whenever anyone interacts with you in any given touch point, they see a flyer, they see a ballot drop-off box, they see an office, they see you on TV, they know they're dealing with the same place. They know that they're dealing with your office, and they don't even have to think twice about, is that the same place that I saw from before? They know exactly who you are. And so that gets to the second point here about the fact that because you are distributors of information, you function as a specific kind of brand in this world. You're not selling things, but you are certainly distributing information, helping people know what to do, when to do it, how to do it. So a consistent brand helps all those voters know that the information they're getting is from that same source, that all the other information they got. So they know that it's coming from that one reliable source. In addition, having an established brand, a logo, a brand identity that you continue to use consistently helps you convey to people that you are professional and credible. So as opposed to just kind of throwing your name around or having a different logo on every last piece, a consistent logo on everything allows you to become credible and professional, that sort of trusted source. And all of this really builds up to, you'll hear me say this several more times in the workshop this morning, that that consistent branding builds trusts with voters. So this really is for us in this spot where none of us are selling product to anyone, but we are conveying ideas to people. Trust is what we're really building, right? We are looking to build trust with the public. And so consistent use of a professional brand allows you to more readily build that trust with the public, so that every time they start to see your logo out in the world, they know where that information is coming from and they know they can trust it. You'll hear me and Alton talk a lot about consistency today, but I want you to know I think there's two halves to this equation. One is develop a logo or brand identity. And those are the pieces I just talked about. The other is absolutely consistent implementation of that logo or brand identity is the thing that makes it valuable. So I tell all of my clients that, you know, the most basic logo that's actually implemented consistently across the board, exponentially more valuable than having a brilliantly designed logo that you only put in a couple of places, or it gets lost behind, or you change it a bunch as you go. So keep that in mind as you're moving forward with any kind of branding for your office. Consistency is where the real value comes from. To drive home the point of the value of brand, I want to point out a couple of things. One, at the very highest level globally. So speaking of that consistency, all of you, I presume, are familiar with brands like Adidas. You know, this is a decades-old global brand that's been sort of famous and instantly recognizable since probably well before Run DMC's World Tour in 1988, but certainly helped along by that instantly recognizable three-stripe pattern that's ubiquitous with their brand. So as I mentioned before, those same key points, this is what a brand as large as Adidas is building. That's given them a trustworthiness. It means that everyone out in the world, the consumers that are buying their pieces, know exactly how to recognize what they are. They know how to recognize the quality. They trust that that brand is going to give them what they want. In their case, in terms of the value of brand, you know, you don't necessarily need to get dollar value out of your brand, but the experts will tell you that the value of the Adidas brand is worth almost $16 billion. And that's of a company that's got just a $25 billion market cap in 2022. So the suggestion here is that the brand itself of Adidas is worth more than half of their overall market cap in terms of their company. It just gives us a good sense about what really writ large, we've got a great example of how valuable brand can be to any given organization. Speaking of value, not all of us have the wherewithal to do this, but then, you know, a place like NYC Votes, the campaign finance board in New York, ended up hiring Pentagram to do their latest brand work. This NYC Votes campaign, Pentagram's arguably one of the most recognizable design firms in the world. These are folks who do work for Citibank and Saturday Night Live and Warner Brothers and League of Legends and the like, and the campaign finance board in New York City knew there was enough value in building a great and consistent brand that they hired the world's best design firm. Not all of us get to go quite there, but it gives you a good sense about how much they understood the value of brand. Lots of other people have done a great job of moving forward with all of their brand and brand identity elements. And we get to see a bunch of great examples now. There's a zillion we couldn't put on this slide, so don't be offended if yours doesn't show up here already. But we just wanted to point out that even if you don't go to Pentagram for your design work, there's all kinds of people implementing great branding and design, logo design work across the board in our nation. And so this is something certainly all of us have the wherewithal and capability to do and glean the value out of it.
That was great. Thank you so much for walking us through that, Drew. I don't know if you all saw on the previous slide, we did highlight the Denver votes, the Denver Elections Division logo. We're lucky enough to have Alton on this call with us today. He was a part of that team that was instrumental in the transition from the Denver Election Commission to the Denver Election Division. And he was on the team that did a lot of that branding work for developing that brand identity. So we're excited to have him on this call, and we are going to kind of put him on the spot and have a Q&A with him to talk to us today about how they did that. So thank you again, Alton, for joining us. So the first question that I actually have for you about the Denver Elections Division, creating that brand and even that logo, is where did the idea come from? So how did you all come up with this idea to create and develop this brand for the Denver Elections Division, especially because it's a brand that's been around for a while? So I will go ahead and open the floor to you.
All right, sounds good. And again, thanks everybody. And Drew, I was expecting you to break out the Run DMC Illin stance during those slides, man. We're gonna get cracking here with that.
Rebecca also won't let me do that. Blame it on her.
So let me give you a little bit of history here. Until 2007, Denver had an election commission that consisted of an appointed clerk and recorder and then 2 commissioners. And so one of the issues with that setup is it really did not create a central point of accountability. So unfortunately, in 2006, there was a technical failure that resulted in more than 20,000 voters being turned away without the ability to cast their ballot. So when that occurred, there was a vote of the people that said, you know what, Denver needs to join the, at the time, other 62 counties in the state to be able to have a elected clerk and recorder like the other counties. And so part of the reason the brand was created, because that thing in 2006 really was a true debacle. We were on the front pages of newspapers. There were helicopters up showing the block-long lines. It was just crazy. So part of the reason the new brand was created was to A, instill confidence, but B, also turn the page on the way things used to be. So that's a bit of the history of how that got started. And I also understand, Rebecca, you had something you wanted to add before we take the deeper dive.
Yeah, so we are going to take a deep dive into developing how you all developed your brand and even designed your logo. But before we dive into that, I do just want to mention that this is a place where researching your brand is super important. We did a quick check internally for Chicago votes. And when we did that quick little Google search, we did find that there actually is a nonprofit based in Chicago that uses the name Chicago Votes. So the Chicago Board of Elections could potentially get into trouble if they were to co-opt that name and use that name for their branding purposes. So it's really important that you're doing market and brand research before you decide on a brand image or even brand name. And you just want to make sure that the identity, that your brand identity is unique and that your logo is unique. So another just kind of important caveat is just to ensure that you're checking with your legal teams before you incorporate a new brand identity, just so that they can do their due diligence and double check and make sure that what you want to use is not already in use. So yes, that was my little disclaimer. Thank you. And then the next question that I have for you, Alton, is how did you all create your logo? Because on the screen, we see the original commission logo and we see a few different iterations of the Denver Elections Division logo. So I'm curious about how you created that logo and if you were able to leverage any in-house talent rather than hiring an expensive external agency or graphic designer.
Yes, thank you so much for that question, Rebecca. So a couple of things there. We were able to leverage in-house talent, but also because of what happened in that 2006 election, the elections office and the office of the clerk and recorder became very well resourced. It was such a black eye on the city and the organization that it's essentially written into our local laws and in our charter that we get the resources to be able to successfully complete our mission. So with the leveraging of the in-house resources, we had a combination of things. We had a former deputy director who became director who had a marketing background. We were also able to leverage a freelancer who was helping us out as a communications assistant and helped us come up with this design. So this design has now been in use for almost 15 years. And to the earlier point that was made, it gets used consistently across a variety of platforms, whether it's on the swag, whether it's on the ballot return envelopes, whether it's on the 24-hour drop boxes. There are ways to create variance within it, but the standard of the brand remains the same. So do you have another question there, Rebecca?
I do. So I do kind of want to go a little bit off topic, and this might be a little bit of a surprise, but Drew was speaking earlier to how establishing your brand and your brand identity really helps with legitimizing your office. And especially because as election officials, we're not selling anything. So we're not trying to get anybody to buy anything, and there's nothing that we have that we're trying to sell. But I feel like sometimes we are trying to promote or push behavior changes where some elected officials that we work for are trying to turn non-voters into voters. Do you think that having an easily recognizable and legitimate brand has helped with that, especially in the case of Denver?
It definitely has, because to your point, Rebecca, one of our beliefs at the former office was that all elections are important. And so you would see this pattern emerging where you would have 80+% turnout for presidential elections, and then a big drop off when it came to the elections that determine the policies for who's going to educate your children, who's going to put those policies in place, who's going to get your potholes filled, who's going to get your trash picked up. And I always like to refer to myself as a pothole voter. Those are the things that really apply to me and my day-to-day existence. I can think of maybe 5 things that have happened federally since the passage of the Civil Rights Act that has anything to do with my day-to-day existence. So I'm one of those voters who always pays attention at the local level. But that also was one of the things that really helped us drive getting more participation, was being able to see, hey, that's something from Denver votes. And because of the audience that we have today, one of the things that I like to say is, especially when it comes to printed material, you want your brand to have the same amount and same cachet as when people see the elections mail indicia. That's how official you want to be, because especially in, like, for instance, here in Denver, where I'm getting to be a voter for the first time in 17 years, as opposed to being inside the business, there are a lot of mailers flying. In order to be able to distinguish what is from us and what is not from a candidate or campaign is key. And then also just the overall application, because as we'll see as we go forward here, we branded pretty much everything. And we can talk as we go along through this discussion, and also maybe in the Q&A, about everything that you can put your brand on when you're getting it in front of the people. Because the other thing about the Denver Elections Office and the Denver Clerk and Recorder was the proactivity of being in communication with our voters. And this is not any kind of political or partisan statement, but I do know that not every jurisdiction says let's proactively engage voters. There are folks who say, all right, well, you show up on election day, cast your ballot, wait for the results. That's all there is to the process. We always believed that there was an education component in making sure people understood the whys of why it's so important to participate in a democracy. So being able to demonstrate that visually played a big role.
Those are all great points. Thank you so much for that. I think that you spoke to something that was interesting where you had buy-in kind of from the beginning, from your elected officials and from the folks who are in your office, and you're able to leverage in-house talent as well to make this happen. Some folks don't necessarily have that level of support. So I'm wondering if you can speak to any pushback that you may have received upon implementation. So this can be in our office, stakeholders, community leaders, even just getting used to using the logo. Was there any pushback that you received or any lessons that you learned that you would like to speak to that may be helpful for folks who are listening in a jurisdiction where they may not have the same level of support or the same amount of resources?
For sure. Elections, as we know, are a 50-state patchwork. So most of the pushback came because Denver is a home rule city and county. So the way that we are structured, we have a strong mayor form of government in the city council. And since 2007, the elected clerk and recorder, there is no reportage there because the clerk and recorder is an independently elected position. So a lot of the pushback, and again, remember, this is historical, we're going all the way back to 2008, 2009, was from the city itself, because the city itself had been used to doing things a certain way for more than a century. And it's like, okay, yes, we are a part of the city and county of Denver government, but the head of this agency is independently elected by the people. And so we did have some back and forth with, at the time, what was sort of the city branding office, because we wanted to have our own logos, not only for the office of the clerk and recorder, but also for the elections entity. We also, because of our involvement in the community, we had what was at the time called the Elections Advisory Committee. And so one of the things that's key with any kind of change is making sure that you have proactive early outreach to external stakeholders. So because of all the problems that occurred, and trust me, the 2006 election was just a culmination of issues with the old commission structure, that group became less of the tribunal that originally was created to be, and more of being able to be our external eyes and ears. And that group consisted of everything from the heads of the major political parties, representatives from labor, representatives from the senior community, representatives from the community of people experiencing disabilities, language minority communities. Getting in touch with all of those people really helped. And because of the fact that the few of us who did carry over from the old commission days were so committed to A, providing a much better voter experience, and B, being able to turn the page on 2006 and some of the things that had happened before then, there was not a lot of internal back and forth, and being able to leverage in-house resources does really help with the buy-in. We can just go down the hall and say, okay, what do we want to do that projects authority, that projects expertise, but doesn't look like a piece of clip art like our former logo?
Those are great points. And this perfectly segues into my next question is, so we talked a little bit about some pushback that you may have received and lessons learned. How was the brand initially received within the community? How did Denverites respond to to the new brand, quintessentially, because we see on the screen that we have the old clip art logo from the Denver Election Commission's days, and it's quite a bit different from what you all created.
Yeah, and the community really loved it, but one of the main reasons that they loved it because it was attached to things they could take away. So by having this, people love stuff. People love free stuff. This logo appears on everything from our official voter materials to you name it when it comes to swag, whether it's jackets, ball caps, sunglasses, lip balms, hand sanitizers, mini coasters that you can put in your car to keep your water bottle from getting your water bottle holder all mucked up. It appeared everywhere. But the fact that we got it in front of people, not just after ballots mailed out or just after voter service and polling centers opened up, the fact that this logo was in circulation, that's one of the things that helped generate the buzz. And like you said, there's slightly different iterations of it, but no matter how you see it, no matter what language you see it in, even when we adapt it for things like holidays or adapt it for things like Pride Month or whatever else, it still had that same element. So people knew where the information was coming from.
I think that's a really important piece to speak to. We work for elected officials, and some of them are term limited, and a new administration may come in and want to change some things about the logo, and that's something that your team has actually dealt with. So on the screen now, we see the very original Denver Election Commission logo, and then we see the Denver Votes, the Denver Elections Division logo. That was kind of the first iteration, but we also see how it's changed over the years. So we see different iterations on the screen. We see how it's been paired with an existing seal. So some offices may not want to create their own logo or their own brand because they already have a seal for the office of the clerk and recorder. So this shows that they can actually coexist together, and they can be paired together to help brand your office and the office of the clerk and recorder, or the office of the auditor, or whoever oversees that elections division or department in your jurisdiction. So I think that that's really important. And I also think on the next slide, also apologies for the noise, that was a very loud motorcycle that just drove by, but on the next slide, I believe that we have a ton of examples that show how this has been used in the community in Denver. So there are different iterations of that I voted sticker for things like Pride Month. It's on all of the voting booths and equipment. It's on the Holland votes, it's on the mobile voting units, it's on swag. So Alton spoke to people loving free things. So there is one thing that Denver does really well, and that is definitely swag. So there are sunglasses and pins, and it's almost overwhelming when you go to a voter registration event that Denver is putting on, because there's so much stuff that they have. You guys should have goodie bags that you give out to folks with just like full to the brim with pens, hats, sunglasses, stickers, magnets. So it's really incredible how this has been able to grow. I am a little bit curious though. We kind of have spoken about lessons learned. We've spoken about how you've implemented this everywhere within the community. If you could go back in time and do something different, is there anything that you would do differently, or what would it have been if you were going to change something?
If going back in time, about the only thing that I think I would have changed would have just been maybe a little earlier implementation of getting the brand used so widely. But I also understand that well, because of what happened in 2006, our first ever elected clerk and recorder was on a mission to make sure nothing like that ever happened again. So a lot of the focus was on the core execution of the elections mission. But as time evolved, the creative juices really got going. And again, being able to leverage in-house talent, which is kind of key. So especially even if you're not a particularly well-resourced office, it's always handy to check with your colleagues and your bosses just to get a handle on what may have been in their skill set, maybe even in a prior career. As I mentioned, our former deputy director who became our director had a marketing background. We were able to leverage a freelancer for the creation of the Denver Votes logo, but even the person that ran 3 of our ballot processing rooms had a private sector ad firm background. So we were able to even utilize him when it came to things like creating ballot envelope designs and stuff. And one other thing I wanted to mention, if you look in the upper right of this slide to the gentleman Drake, my former colleague, and his sunglasses there, speaks to the need to, whenever possible, and again, I understand 50-state patchwork and all of that, but the importance of being able to use your logo, especially if it's a call to action like insert name of jurisdiction here, votes, the importance of being able to use it both as things like hashtags, but also vanity URLs. This is something that's, interesting to me because in my 17 years that I spent in the business, there were a lot of people when I first started presenting at conferences who would look at me like I had 2 heads. It's like, you all actually communicate with your voters? And it's like, well, yeah. And we try to make it easy for our voters to participate in the process. And one thing that I always suggest is be able to create something that you can turn into a vanity URL. We are in a society with 180 character attention span these days. So being able to type in elections at this city, at this state, at this CO, at this .us, .usa.gov, that doesn't resonate with people. Being able to say, go to denvervotes.org. Quick, simple, points people to the information. And also on the hashtag piece, it really also shows the engagement. If anyone ever gets a chance to look at the Denver elections Instagram, and we actually have a municipal election underway in Denver now, give it a look-see. You will see people posting their I voted stickers on their beer mugs, on their dog's noses, on their coffee cups, because that has become such a part of the experience. And trust me, there were a couple of years that as we were building this out, especially as we first moved to the mail ballot delivery model, people were like, well, yeah, thanks for the convenience. I still want a sticker. So now those are enclosed in our mail ballot packets. And so make sure that you're getting your brand in front of as many people as you can at all times, but also make sure you can convert it into something that you can use as a vanity.
That is all great advice. Thank you so much for speaking to all of that. I think you did kind of touch on this last question that I do have, but just in case there's something else that you can think of that you might want to add for folks who are tuning in, is what additional advice do you have for election officials who are wanting to create and implement something similar? So they've seen the Denver Votes brand, they want something similar in their jurisdiction. What advice do you have for them?
Well, the advice that I have is, one of the things that I, mentioned is understanding that not all offices are as well resourced. So there are still ways that you can do this. Again, you can leverage the ability of an existing colleague. You do have the ability to, maybe look at an external design firm or an external marketing firm. But a key thing is you can also work with us here at the elections group. And Rebecca, you can probably flesh that part out a bit more, but having a brand is so important. Sometimes you have to be creative. Sometimes you have to be able to make the fiscal ask and also build the case for why it's important. because again, there are going to be some people that say, well, you know, if people are participating in their civic responsibility, we shouldn't have to do anything to make sure their votes get counted. That mentality is going away, and hopefully it's going away more and more as time goes by.
Great. Those were all great points. Thank you so much, Alton, and thank you for speaking about your experience at the Denver Election Commission and the transition to the Denver Elections Division. And this is all really helpful and great advice. I do see that we do have some questions in the chat, so we will get to those during our Q&A portion. I just didn't want anyone to think that we were ignoring those questions, but we do see them and we will get to them. So with the time that we have left, I am going to kick things back over to Drew to speak a little bit about creating your brand identity. And I will also get to plug some elections group products and services that we have during this time as well. But before I kick things over to Drew, when we're talking about creating your brand, I do just want to let you guys know at home, just take some time to make sure that your brand or brand identity is not an imitation of another organization's. We gave the example of Chicago Votes a little bit earlier in the chat, but as we're heading into this conversation, it's really important that we lean into that and just make sure that we're not copying anyone else intentionally or unintentionally. So thank you again, Alton, and I will kick things over to Drew.
Great. Thanks, Alton. Like I said earlier, I like to think of the logo design part as the easy part of this, the work that Alton did to he and his team to put together, implementing that and, you know, navigating the channels. Easy for me to say, you know, get yourself a logo and use it consistently. But Alton's story shows, you know, we recognize there's a lot of legwork that makes that happen. And certainly that part can be challenging, but also rewarding. And it's great to see it pulled off so well, and with the level of success that Alton and his team did there in Denver, and continues to live on beyond Alton, even actively being there to shepherd it. I want to cover 3 different sets of advice related to creating your brand. This is going to build on what I said earlier, but also build on what you just heard from Alton talking about in Denver. One of those is about the idea of these options you do have for designing a new logo. You've heard us cover the basic ideas of these topics before, but really there's a few different ways you can go about this. If you get to a point where you think, okay, we're ready to do this, let's think seriously about our branding. The key piece of that is going to be the logo. How do we go about moving forward on that? So certainly one of the options you've got there is, you know, put together either an internal team and or designer. Alton had a collection of great resources on this, and a really strong suggestion about making sure to just ask around on some of your teams about who's got some skill sets that may not even be part of their day-to-day job description, but maybe they've got background in that in a way that you can leverage those internal resources of people and not have to go outside and spend dollar resources to do that. If you have the luxury of dollar resources, one of the other options you certainly have is to hire an outside design professional or design firm ad agency to do that branding work. That's the New York City Votes example that we showed earlier. And then I've got great news today, and that is thanks to the fine folks at Elections Group. I hope you're all aware already of the communications resource desk that they have available, but they've put together a team of available experts and resources to be able to help any given elections office or elections official put election groups resources to use on building everything from logo to identity guidelines to any number of other communications help. And either all or almost all of that is completely free of charge. You know, they're out there doing the hard work, helping elections offices put this together. So we'll talk just a little bit more about that later, but I urge you to consider it as an option as you move forward looking at branding. Danny, I'm going to have you try and find the considerations before designing a new logo slide. It may have gotten moved back 2 slides, or it could be the next one. Apologies. There, perfect. This is going to reiterate some points that Alton made, but I want to make sure to put them in front of you clearly one more time. As you begin the process and you think, all right, I think we're a good candidate for a new brand. Let's put a brand identity in place. There's some considerations I want to make sure everyone's thinking about as they move forward. Definitely this idea about thinking through really where are all of the places that you're currently using some version of a logo or one of the 12 logos you may already have, or you're just typing your name at the top of a sheet of paper, or you're letting the ballot box vendor throw your name together on the side of a graphic that goes there, or you are giving out some swag somewhere, but you let the people that design the coasters put your name on it, however which way. That's worst case scenario across the board, but it's meant to reiterate the idea that you probably use your name or logo in way more places than you think. And it's a good idea before you start the process to just sit down and start thinking about, okay, what are all of those really? Let's talk about every last touch point we have with the public. And there's probably our name or logo on it somewhere. Let's get a list of all that so we've got it in front of us. Second point then is really to take that data and think through what the budget's going to mean on this, right? Not everybody's as well-resourced as New York City votes, or maybe even as well-resourced as the new Denver votes endeavor. So you can be very successful in implementing a new brand, even if you don't have all the money in the world or a whole bunch of award-winning graphic designers that happen to be working on your staff. But it's a matter of, being realistic and sort of starting to think through that list of not really just that top line item about what would it cost to hire an outside professional to design a logo, but really to think more about, we want to work with Elections Group and the Communications Resource Desk. They'll help us with the logo part, and we won't have to put a bunch of financial resources into that. But what is it going to take to implement this? What is it going to take to start putting it in all the places that we encounter people? And if the budget's not there, as a side note, I would say think about how to start triaging that, right? We talked about consistency here, but sometimes people don't have the budget to reprint every last thing in their office at once. But we got to look at, okay, what are the main things we send out that most voters see? Or if there's things that 100% of voters see, let's make sure those are the things that we prioritize in terms of the budget. And then if there start to be some other things that only go out to 20% of the voters, get them into the budget for later, but maybe they don't have to be there the first day. And then last, but certainly not least, Alton also touched on this, but I would say there's real value in getting buy-in writ large, and that's on two sides. One is at the top level from all the decision makers, the people with veto power, the people with control over the purse strings of the budget, anyone who's going to be able to say yes, no, maybe on either a decision to rebrand or what a logo looks like. Make sure all of those people are involved in the process. But then on the other side of that coin, the implementation piece is really based on all of the frontline workers, everybody boots on the ground. And so what you want to do is early on in the process is really get buy-in from all of them as well. Hey, we're engaging in this rebrand. It's going to be really important that we are consistently putting ourselves out in front of people. We're going to need all of your help to do that, because it's going to involve, putting the new logo on the website and on the voter pamphlets and on the ballot drop-off boxes, but also in our email signatures and on every last postcard that goes out. And there are going to be a lot of people in your office, undoubtedly, that are in charge of different elements of that piece. And so you want them all on board and excited to be consistently implementing that logo as well. And then back a couple of slides for me. There. Then tactically, I want to leave you with a couple other points. Once you've gotten all of that other stuff in place, smooth sailing from there on out. As you move forward with the design of a new logo, the designer in me can't help but give you a couple of recommendations about actual tactical logo design. One is absolutely, we lose this sometimes when we get excited about designing new logos and we want to put everything in the kitchen sink into them. But even if you design a color logo that has some exciting elements and the like in it, you need to keep a keen eye towards the idea of it being easily reproducible, right? I don't need to tell you that sometimes you are sending things out to all of your voters on the cheap, and it's a 3x5 black and white postcard that's got to get to everybody. And as you've hopefully learned by now, you definitely want to put the new logo on there. but you can't put the full color logo on it. And so if the logo only works in full color, then you're sort of back where you started. So making sure those things aren't too detailed, so they're not going to get ruined when you have to use a super cheap printer to get that postcard in the mail, and then working in black and white. And the Denver Boats logo is a great example of that, right? It's brilliant and it's fun and it's exciting when it's in color, but then you saw it used there in one color on various places, and it still holds up. You can still recognize it as exactly the same logo. You know that it came from the exact same place. I think that's really important to keep in mind. Second, Rebecca touched on this a bit as well, but it's really important that you make you make your new logo unique to you. And that's on a couple of, maybe three key fronts. One is certainly you want to be able to use it as a tool that distinguishes you from all the other county offices or the local offices around. So while it may be a variation on that, depending on how your structure of your county sets up, certainly you want people to be able to recognize that your Hamilton County Elections Office logo isn't confusingly similar to the Hamilton County Dog Catcher's Office logo. Same, you don't want to be copying other elections offices around the country so that someone literally has some confusion around the idea of whether or not they're in Hamilton County, Florida, or Hamilton County, Alabama, and which elections office they're getting materials from. And then Rebecca touched on this before, you really do want to take some time, do a little due diligence to make sure that your logo isn't an imitation of another logo. You certainly don't want to start from a place where you're like, ooh, I love that one logo I saw Idaho use. We'll just use exactly that one and swap our name in, or some things like that. But also the Chicago Votes example Rebecca gave earlier is a good reminder that you want to make sure you're also not imitating or building something confusingly similar to even nonprofits in your area or for-profit companies operating in your county or your state. And then to help with hopefully you've heard my message about consistency and implementation. To help with that, we certainly strongly recommend building a simple set of usage guidelines. You're going to see us show an example of that in just a second, but a baseline to be able to say to everyone who's ever going to be using your logo, here's the logo, here's how it gets used, here's how it should not be used, here's what it looks like in black and white, if appropriate, here's the two consistent colors that our elections office uses, or here's the standard typeface that we actually use also as a recognizability element. Whenever we send out a printed material, it's always in this typeface. You can include all of those in a very simple usage guidelines doc that then becomes the North Star that everyone internally refers to when they're going to be building any kind of touch point. But you can also send it out to vendors, anybody that's going to be designing a mail-in ballot envelope for you or a piece of swag. You give them that same set of usage guidelines to make sure that they're also following the basic rules. And then just in case you didn't hear me say it before, plan ahead to implement that logo everywhere. Hopefully, every last person in your elections office will get it tattooed on their body somewhere when you're done with the logo design process. Use that as a guide. That's the ultimate goal. Build towards that goal.
Great. Thank you so much, Drew. So we do have about 5 minutes left. We have a couple of questions in the chat. So I will go ahead and we will answer those super quickly with those 5 minutes. And then we will talk a little bit about our resources here at the Elections Group and the service that we do offer. So the first question is, my official letterhead has been used for years and therefore has an established history for trusted information. However, that was not appropriate for social media. We now have a mix of 3 to 4 different identities at this point. If not going through your 2006 change, so it looks like this question is for Alton, do you have any suggestions on how to lose some long-term recognition in order to gain the new uniform branding?
Yes, it is a transition. So just, using the example of the old election commission, they existed for decades prior to the creation of the Denver Elections Division of the Office of the Clerk and Recorder. So part of going back to what Drew mentioned about getting buy-in that would be a very good place to be able to just literally be that transparent with the audience you serve and say, hey, we understand this is what you're used to seeing, but what would you like to do to help us maybe modernize or maybe combine some of these things to keep up with the times without losing the identity we created. So for something like that, I would definitely convene external and internal mini stakeholders group.
I think that's a great suggestion to get that buy-in. The other question that we did have in the chat did pertain to logos and brands being subject to copyright. So we don't actually have any attorneys on the call with us today. We are all super fun marketing and communications folks, so that may have been a mistake. But I would recommend for that question or any other questions that you have pertaining to copyright laws to bring those to your legal team first and foremost.
And if I could just hop in on that one just briefly, that's one of the things that we always had to do to make sure like candidates and campaigns were not co-opting our logo. So we did have a cease and desist letter at the handy in case our logo ended up on somebody's campaign materials.
That's a really good point, and drafted by your genius legal team.
Correct.
So please use those attorneys that you have working for your jurisdictions. So that does wrap up our Q&A portion. Thank you everybody in the audience who participated, and thank you for joining us. I would like to bring your attention to this last slide that we have. So Drew already mentioned this, but this is our identity usage guidelines document. Drew actually helped us create this here at the Elections Group. This template can help jurisdictions who are looking to create and maintain consistent branding, and it's available for download. I dropped a link to this document in the chat, and I also dropped a link to our support intake form for our communications resource desk. Drew had mentioned that our services and our support is free of charge. So it's free where support is allowed and needed, and then we do charge a fair price elsewhere. So if you're in one of those jurisdictions that can't accept free support, we do have fair prices for you all. And then folks who are wanting, like I said, that more in-depth and personalized support, including logo ideation, we also can help with development. You can fill out that intake form or shoot us an email at support@electionsgroup.com. And then all of these resources are available on our website as well at www.electionsgroup.com. So I would just like to again extend a huge thank you to Drew and Alton for being here. They truly are the experts and made this workshop possible for us. And then I would like to thank all of y'all who tuned in from your respective jurisdictions as well. You all are making this possible as well. So thank you all for joining us. And that wraps everything up. So thank you all again.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.